She arrived with one piece of paper, one question, and one purpose. Say the truth. What happens next? Jimmy Kimmel lost his temper in front of millions, and the internet saw it all. Karoline Leavitt was not naive. She understood that entering into a late-night talk show, particularly this one, was like intruding on someone else's land. Nevertheless, she accepted the offer. The email from the producers presented it as an opportunity to discuss the rising voice of young voters, and she thought it was worthwhile to turn up for. However, the phrasing seemed a touch too polished and controlled. She arrived in Los Angeles late in the afternoon. A vehicle picked her up at the airport and transported her directly to the studio on Hollywood Boulevard. The driver didn't say anything, simply played a selected Spotify playlist that included a lot of sarcastic comedy songs. Karoline glanced out the window, wondering how much of the night had already been planned before she consented to come there. Backstage, something seemed odd. The hospitality was good. Bottled water, fruit tray, and happy interns. However, the vibe seemed weird. People smiled at her, but not warmly. It seemed like the type of grin someone gives you when they believe they know how the narrative will finish. One of the producers, Lacey, entered with a clipboard and a phony cheer. Karoline, thank you for being here. Jimmy is thrilled to chat to you. Just a heads up, we may toss in a few lighthearted jokes, but nothing too outrageous. Karoline grinned. I can take a joke. Lacey grinned as if she didn't believe it. Before leaving, she said, "Oh, and no phones on stage. Okay? Standard policy." That paragraph impacted me differently. No phones. Karoline has been on enough programs to know it wasn't the norm. But she nodded and slipped her phone inside her bag. Her makeup was done fast and professionally with little talk. No small talk. No, what brought you to LA? Only a brush, some powder, and stillness. The Green Room TV broadcast muted footage of the show's past speeches. She saw Jimmy ridicule numerous politicians, primarily conservatives. She was aware of what this was, but she also understood why she had come here. A few minutes later, a young assistant wearing a headset knocked and motioned her ahead. You'll be up in 5. She took a breath, fixed her jacket, and adjusted her microphone. As she proceeded to approach the stage door, she heard the crowd laughing at something Jimmy had just said. Probably another barb at her expense. But she didn't move. As she waited behind the curtain, she got a fleeting glance at Jimmy on the monitor. He appeared free and easygoing, leaning into the throng with his signature smile. And now, he added, please welcome Karoline Leavitt, a former White House staffer, the youngest Republican congressional candidate in history, and someone who may be able to tell us what the kids are thinking these days. Polite claps and a few laughs. She stepped out with a firm grin and shoulders back. Jimmy rose to welcome her, shaking her hand, and then turning to face the crowd as they sat down. Karoline, thank you for being here. We had to move our flat earth argument to accommodate you, so there is no pressure. Laughter. Karoline smiled calmly. Thank you for hosting me. I've heard that flat earthers are more accepted in Hollywood anyhow. That elicited diverse reactions. A few chuckles and some embarrassing coughs. She wasn't there to win the room. She was come to tell the truth. Even if no one else in the studio knew what was about to happen, she did. But something was developing under the surface, and the next 5 minutes were going to alter everything. The lights overhead were hotter than they seemed on television. Karoline could feel them baking into her flesh, but her face remained calm. Her body moved slightly forward in her seat, not too eager or defensive. Jimmy, on the other hand, seemed to have recently achieved a personal best at the gym. Loose tie, legs crossed, one arm draped over the back of his chair, as if he owned the whole place. So, Karoline, he started by casually glancing through his blue note cards. You have a lot of perspectives for someone who was still in high school when I received my first Emmy. That made the audience chuckle. This was an old technique. Poke at age, position yourself as the experienced voice in the room, and get the audience's support early on. Karoline did not blink. Well, Jimmy, I was still in high school when many individuals made bad judgments for my generation. I believe it gave me plenty of drive to get caught up quickly. The crowd hesitated, unsure if it was all right to laugh. Then someone applauded. Only one individual. A minute later, the program continued. Jimmy laughed and shook his head, as if joking along, but his eyes narrowed slightly. He leaned forward. People are curious about what motivates someone your age to pursue a career in politics. Most people your age are busy recording TikTok videos and sipping oat milk. Another easy chuckle. This time, the volume is little higher. Karoline smiled, but her tone changed. Because I don't want the people who decide my future to be the same ones who ridicule it on late-night TV. The subsequent stillness had weight. Jimmy's joke did not land as intended. He looked toward the control booth, maybe waiting for a command to reroute. He shuffled his cards, looking for a safe question. Okay, fair enough, but you don't believe these programs have any real effect, do you? We are simply having fun here. Karoline cocked her head slightly. You don't believe humor influences opinion? Jimmy shrugged. I believe humor helps people laugh. That is my work. She leaned in. So, why does so much of your content match with one political party's messaging? Why does your program solely poke fun at one side? The crowd laughed again, but this time with more intensity. More unclear. Jimmy opened his lips to speak, but Karoline spoke first. I did bring something. She reached behind her seat and removed a folded piece of paper. It was sharp and clean, emphasized in yellow over a few lines. Last October, she said, you aired a story on anti-science Republicans and cited a sentence virtually word for word from a strategic email put out by a media coordination company located in D.C. that was paid by the PAC. Jimmy sat erect, not smiling. Karoline kept the paper between them. I have the memo. I can read it. Jimmy's voice sank. You're alleging I used a script from a political organization? I'm suggesting that someone on your team may have. If you didn't already know, you should have. The room stopped laughing. Jimmy attempted to laugh it off, his voice somewhat louder than normal. Oh my, I assume the kids grabbed her conspiracy board with the red yarn backstage, right? There were a few chuckles, but the tension was genuine. Karoline did not flinch. No yarn, just receipts. And with that, she placed the document on the desk between them. The camera switched to Jimmy, but his typical sparkle was gone. His lips twitched into a half-smile, but it did not reach his eyes. Do you honestly believe this is the place to do that? He asked more quietly now. Karoline responded calmly. Why not? You asked me here to discuss political awareness. I am aware, and now so is your audience. But if Jimmy believed that was the end of it, he was about to see how rapidly the room might change. Jimmy did not touch the paper. He stared at it as if it were infectious, a prop from the wrong scenario. The cameras were still filming, and the atmosphere had shifted from bright and humorous to rigid and electric. You could practically hear the team holding their breath behind the lenses. Karoline sat back in her chair, not arrogant, but solid. This wasn't a performance. It was a preparation. Jimmy grabbed for a cup of water that had not been touched. His hand trembled slightly, which was noticeable. Something cracked with that slightest move. So, what are you accusing me of? He asked, attempting to infuse some levity but falling short. That I'm part of a deep-state comedic cabal? She shakes her head. Not a conspiracy, simply a network of media professionals that seem to be independent while following the same political script. She stared at the audience. Not the camera, not Jimmy, but the people sitting in those rows beneath the bright lights. Most of you probably came here tonight to have a laugh, right? But how many of you were aware that Jimmy's October program on anti-science hysteria was proposed by a Red River Initiative-employed media consultant? That's a PAC financed by 3 political contributors who, only last year, supported the same ad campaigns that your program mocks. Nobody said anything. Red River Initiative was not a household name. But Karoline wasn't lying. Her folder had dates, names, email headers, and money amounts. Jimmy's jaw shifted slightly, as if he were chewing on words he hadn't chosen yet. He glanced back to the control booth. Could we? He murmured, definitely not on cue. But they didn't cut yet. Karoline did not wait for permission. I'm not suggesting you authored it, she said, going back to Jimmy. I believe someone in your building did. Someone got the phrase, acquired the spin, and passed it on. And then it came up in your speech, disguised as humor. Jimmy snapped back. Do you think I write every joke? No, she said, but you take credit for them. The crowd muttered. Several folks moved in their chairs. Even in Hollywood, on a comedy set, something about this stuck. Jimmy tried again, leaning forward, plainly shaken. Karoline, with all due respect, this seems a lot like the kind of stuff people say to seek attention. I do not accept directions from DC strategists. I do not accept commands from anybody. She hesitated. So why are you so upset right now? That landed hard. The inquiry did not need a response. That was the answer. Jimmy's jaw stiffened. Because you're appearing on my program and accusing me of being a puppet. Karoline fixed. I'm pointing out that the puppeteers could be closer than you realize. The audience didn't know what to do. They would come for the humor, not the drama. However, as time passed, the situation became obvious. This was not scripted. Nor by the network, nor by Karoline, and certainly not by Kimmel. And that is when it occurred. Jimmy slapped his palm into the desk. Not hard enough to damage anything, but enough to keep the place quiet. That's all, he said. We're finished. He glanced off stage, made a slating motion across his neck, and terminated the program. Karoline, sitting motionless, offered one more inquiry. If you really have nothing to conceal, why not let me finish? The lights darkened significantly as the team prepared for the ad. Unfortunately, it was too late. A few audience members had already taken out their phones. Nobody worried about the no recording rule anymore. The raw footage was supposed to be out, and by dawn, everyone would know precisely how it went down. But what came next was more than simply a clip. It was a chat. It was not something Jimmy Kimmel could control. Jimmy's face was tense by the time they returned from their commercial break. No more casual jokes or crowd-pleasing banter, just a stony half-smile and forced calmness. Karoline was still sat, calm, and clutching the folded paper with the highlighted lines. The studio had lost its bounce. It was dead silent between laughter now. The applauding signals could as well have been invisible. Jimmy managed a laugh when the camera returned to them. Well, that escalated, he added, gazing out at the audience. It was the kind of phrase intended to change the mood. But nobody laughed. Not really. Several claps, uncertain. The crowd was no longer with him. They weren't against him either. They were just watching. He turned to Karoline. So, are we doing journalism now? Or do you still pretend to be a politician? Karoline maintained the same level of calm that she had when she entered. Neither, she said, only trying to convey the truth. I thought that was popular. Jimmy leaned forwards. You come in here, make a lot of charges, name-drop political parties that no one has heard of, and expect people to simply go along with it? I expect people to think, she explained. And I want you, of all others, to remain calm when someone puts up facts in a discourse. He laughed, but it didn't sound normal. Facts? You believe printing out a blog article from the internet qualifies you as an expert? Karoline taps the paper on his desk. This did not originate from a blog. It originated in a leaked email discussion. Your team was copied. That was it. Jimmy stood up. Actually stood. The chair creaked as it moved backward. I don't have to sit here and be accused of being a voice for the Republicans' fever dreams. He snapped, his voice no longer TV smooth. I invite you here to have a calm discussion, and instead I get a Gen Z Tucker Carlson who believes that ranting is the same as making a point. Karoline remarked, I haven't raised my voice once. Without moving. That is all you. Some of the crew members started to shift anxiously. One of the stage managers made a hesitant step forward, then paused. It was unclear if this was still a section or a breakdown. Jimmy seemed to be about to walk away, but that would mean allowing Karoline to have the last say, which was not an option. He pointed at her and jabbed the air. You're not here to help people think. You are here to further a story. You came on the program to generate headlines, not to have a discussion. She nodded gently. That is one perspective on the situation. Another possibility is if I approached you with a genuine chat and you were not prepared for it. The crowd froze. It did not feel like television anymore. It seemed as if a camera had stumbled into someplace it was not intended to photograph. Nobody signed up for this behind-the-scenes look, but no one could stop watching. Then Jimmy said it. I'm not here to babysit an intern with a vendetta against late nights. It was inexpensive, intimate, and desperate. Karoline didn't answer immediately. She glanced down, laughed briefly, and returned her gaze to his. That, she replied, is the issue. You assume that if someone is younger than you, they must be incorrect. But the reality is you are not afraid of me. You're terrified that others will believe me. A murmur sounded around the room. Jimmy sat back down, his gaze fixated on the desk, drumming his fingers. His producers did not send any signals. The director did not cut. For a few seconds, all you could hear was silence. Something never occurs on live television. Karoline then stood. I believe we're done here, she said. I spoke what I intended to say. She turned, left the stage, and went past the curtain. There is no handler or security. Just she. And the crowd, hushed now, watched her go. But, as Jimmy sat startled in his own studio, a separate program was already airing online. And this time, he didn't host it. The first footage was posted on Twitter before Karoline's sneakers reached the ground outside the studio. Shot from the third row with unsteady hands. It captured Jimmy's precise moment of standing up and barking that she was peddling GOP fever fantasies. Within minutes, the hashtag #HackedKimmelMeltdown began trending in Los Angeles. An hour later, it had become a countrywide craze. Initially, the postings were divided. Kimmel's diehard supporters said she was planting theories. But the whole portion began to leak. With it came background, Karoline's calm demeanor, and Jimmy's abrupt interruption. Someone in the front row grabbed a high-resolution screen that clearly showed the document she put on the desk. People halted, rewatched, and questioned. A YouTube video appeared immediately after midnight. It was a split screen, Karoline on one side and Jimmy on the other. In slow motion, spectators could see exactly when his manner shifted. The remarks were savage. She was prepared. He lost control. I don't care where you are politically. This didn't look well on Jimmy. Since when is requesting openness considered a conspiracy? By daybreak, the video had been seen more than 2 million times. Even those who had never heard of Karoline before the interview recognized her name. Others commended her for revealing the media's prejudice. Others appreciated her restraint. And then something unexpected occurred. A former Kimmel staff writer, who is no longer involved with the program, started a thread. She did not exactly corroborate the memo, but she did suggest that portions often came from sources outside the writer's room and that no one asked too many questions if the content was excellent and timely. That was all the internet needed. Other former workers chipped in, with some backing Jimmy and others remaining unclear. The conjecture intensified, and news sources took it up. Some attempted to dismiss it by calling the memo unconfirmed. Others confessed that political parties may have influenced the performance. Karoline was quiet for much of the day. There are no tweets or press statements. That, more than anything, fueled the flames. She did not need to say anything. The footage spoke for itself. Then, at 4:03 p.m., she shared a single phrase on X. Truth does not panic. There's nothing else. No hashtags. There is no pointing of fingers. It received 75,000 retweets in under 2 hours. Meanwhile, Kimmel's crew scrambled. There was no formal apology, just a generic statement from the network saying late-night programming is first and foremost about entertainment and that editorial independence is critical to its creative freedom. But it wasn't enough. Clips from previous episodes reappeared, speeches that, when seen again, were disturbingly similar to news releases from activist organizations. People began making distinctions, not just between Jimmy and the Red River Initiative, but also between late-night programs in general and larger political apparatus. And the issue kept coming up, how much of what we laugh at is propaganda disguised as a smile? Karoline started receiving requests from programs that would not have interested her a week earlier, including podcasts, radio stations, and even a few liberal-leaning sites. People weren't suddenly switching sides, but they were captivated by how she remained calm while a seasoned host crumbled. The division was no longer clean. It wasn't about left or right. It was about honesty, power, who gets to influence the discourse, and what happens when someone unexpectedly takes the microphone away. A college student in Tempe watched Karoline's interview on her laptop while in between courses. In a cafe outside of Wichita Falls, two elderly men questioned if humor had become simply another kind of political technique. And somewhere in Santa Rosa, a public school teacher displayed the encounter to her civics students as a discussion starter rather than a surprise. But the narrative wasn't just about Karoline anymore. It was about how quickly trust can be broken and the truth exposed when someone refuses to sit down. The following show of Jimmy Kimmel Live did not address the event. No jokes, no explanation, no reference to what had dominated headlines over the previous 48 hours. Jimmy emerged beaming, performed a light monologue on weather apps and celebrity divorces, and continued as if nothing had occurred. People did notice, however. Clips of the uncomfortable pause in which his typical political quips should have appeared spread nearly as quickly as the initial outburst. Commenters were not nice. You can't shout on live television and then pretend nothing happened. If that was all rubbish, why not say it? We saw it. It cannot be erased. Behind the scenes, things were also not going as well. Network executives convened emergency meetings. Ratings fell marginally, but more troubling was a loss in audience trust. Sponsors began raising discrete concerns not about Karoline but about integrity. Karoline, on the other hand, was cautious in her use of momentum. She denied all big interviews save one. She recorded a long-form podcast with a journalist from Des Moines. A modest channel, no fancy production, just a meaningful discourse. She didn't talk about the event for over an hour. She discussed being underestimated, why she opted to speak up on national television, and the necessity of understanding who molds the information that people laugh at, believe, and accept without question. You don't have to agree with me, she added, but you should recognize when someone is selling you an opinion disguised as entertainment. The footage of that phrase also went viral. It was not fiery. It was not dramatic. It was evident. People appreciated that. By the end of the week, late-night comedy programs across the board had been investigated. Viewers started to notice trends, including jokes repeated across networks. They used the same terminology and had comparable timing when it came to the news they covered and disregarded. Karoline revealed a narrative that was not just about Jimmy. It was about the whole civilization. She never claimed to be a hero or that she had disclosed anything. She just came up prepared and refused to back down when the temperature climbed. That left an impression. In schools, online forums, and even a few editorial meetings throughout the nation, individuals started to raise an old topic in a new manner. Who chooses what is hilarious, and why does it always seem to favor one point of view? People did not abruptly switch off their televisions or stop laughing. They had only begun paying closer attention. And in an era when so much of what we hear sounds pre-approved and neatly packaged, that knowledge, no matter where you stand politically, is a start towards something better. Karoline's message was not about picking sides. It was about refusing to allow anybody, whether a comedian, politician, or CEO, speak for you without your consent. That is the kind of talk that sticks. And maybe that's why, despite all the noise, algorithms, and frantic efforts to distract, a calm voice in the midst of turmoil still rings truer than any written joke. If this tale made you think even for a second, please share it. Tell someone. Ask difficult questions. And the next time you hear something that seems professional but lacks personality, take a closer look. The truth does not always scream. It sometimes just waits for someone who is ready to talk quietly and without looking away.